Hello, this is Saransh Garg from Case Interviews Cracked. In the following case, I'll be interviewing the candidate. It is a profitability case where the client is facing a sales decline issue. Hi, Snigdha.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get started with our case.
Okay.
Our client is an electronics manufacturer.
Okay.
Over the last couple of years, they've seen a sales decline of 20%.
Okay.
And they've asked us to step in and help them turn around the situation.
Okay. So I just want to ask you a couple of background questions.
Sure.
For how long have the sales been declining?
So this decline has happened over a period of 2 years.
Okay. And what exactly is our client doing? Which products does it?
Sure.
deal in?
So our client manufactures several kitchen utility appliances like toasters, refrigerators, microwave ovens.
Okay. And what part of the value chain do we lie in?
So we are only doing manufacturing as of now, but distribution and retailing is taken over by third parties. This was a good preliminary question that the candidate asked. Market entry questions can often be very ambiguous with their goals, especially when the interviewer first asks the question. Hence, it's a good idea to ask the question on what parameters should we decide whether the client should enter the market or not. This helps in identifying the goal that the client is trying to achieve and also the metric based on which the client would evaluate their success. In this case specifically, the candidate has uncovered that the client is looking to
Okay. Very interesting. So I'm going to start by drawing out the profit structure and then we can go down one
Sure.
branch of it. So we have profits that are revenue minus the cost. Now since the problem already says that we've been having a sales decline, I'm going to neglect looking at the cost side of it.
All right.
Right? So I'm going to divide revenue into number of units into price per unit. I like some information on this.
This would be the average price per unit?
Yes.
Okay.
What is happening to the number of units that we're selling?
So we have seen a decline in terms of the number of units that we've sold.
How much would that be? Do you have any data on that?
So I think it would be somewhere close to around 20%, 19 to 20%.
Okay, and what's happening to the average price of the unit?
Our average price per unit is in fact going slightly up, or
Okay.
a few percentage points up.
Okay. One more clarifying question that I'd like to ask is it that one particular product is seeing the sales in decline, or is it happening across the whole range of products?
That's actually a good question. So if we look at our product portfolio,
Yes.
what we've observed is the majority decline is happening in the toasters segment.
Okay, so this is happening with toasters. So would I be right in assuming that we should just analyze the toasters part of it?
Sure.
Another question is this happening through all our regions of sale, or is it just happening in one particular area that we're functioning in?
In terms from the customer point of view, we've seen a uniform decline across all over the country wherever we are selling.
Okay. I'm just going to analyze the value chain over here to see where
Sure.
the bottleneck is. So we have manufacturing, distribution, and then the customer demand.
Yes.
Now, do you think the problem is stemming from a manufacturing bottleneck? Is it that we are not able to keep up the manufacturing demand?
In fact, over the last 3 months,
Yes.
in one of our factories, we did have a production issue because of which we had to shut our factory for about 3 months.
Okay. How much was the monthly manufacturing that we had before the 3-month shutdown?
So we don't have exact numbers, but before the 3 months, we did have certain production targets which we were meeting.
Okay. Is it that the number that we would have sold or manufactured in those 3 months, we've not been able to make that up in the months following?
So our 3 months,
shutdown?
3 month shutdown that we had was was about a year ago that we did. And since the shutdown,
Yes.
we've started meeting our production targets, but we are still not seeing the kind of sales we used to have before like from 2 years ago, from 2 years back.
Okay, so the problem seems to be stemming from something beyond manufacturing.
Yes, that seems
Okay.
to be the case.
So
The candidate at this point knows that production is not the only reason why there is a sales decline. However, she chooses to directly move on to the next part of her framework without trying to understand how much of the problem is really due to production issues. A better approach would have been to say, I'd like to understand to what extent is production the source of the problem. In the case, it so happens that production is responsible for 10% of the sales decline, while there are other reasons for the remaining 10%.
let me just move on to distribution. Are we able to supply our? We must be able to supply to our distributors the number that they demand, right? Because we
Right.
don't have a manufacturing bottleneck.
Right.
Now, are they able to push all of our products into retail stores or where it is that we sell our products?
What kind of information would you require to test that hypothesis?
If you're selling them 10 units, if you're giving them 10 units, are they able to get all of those 10 units into shops? Or is it that they are left with some number that are not being able to go to the shops?
So, in fact, the sales that we do comes from the distributor. He gives us quotations in terms of for the next month, how many units would he like to take, and he will give us repeat orders.
Okay.
So, what we've seen is we are not getting as many orders as we used to 2 years back from the distributor.
Okay. So that must be because he's not able to sell our products.
Right.
Now, what is happening? Is the demand in toasters going down across for our competitors as well, or is it just for us that this is happening?
So, when we look at our competitors, we've got four other competitors. Let's call them A, B, C, and D.
Okay.
And we've seen that A and B have in fact seen an increase in sales,
Yes.
while C and D have seen a decline.
Okay, so it seems like the share of A and B in the toaster market is going up, while C, D, and V are sort of losing out on shares.
Yes, that happens to be the
Right.
case.
So, do we have any data on whether our distributors are pushing A and B sales more than our products?
What kind of information you would require to test that hypothesis? The candidate wants to test the hypothesis that distributors are pushing competitor products more preferably than the client's products. It's always a good idea to ask the interviewer for the information required to test the hypothesis instead of asking him for the solution. As a consultant, it's your role to provide the client the answer, while it's the client's role to provide you any data you would like. You can always validate your findings with your client later.
Right, that's a very good question. I'm not sure how we can test that hypothesis. We'd have to sort of ask what's happening on the retail front. Is it that what about the margins that we give to our distributors? Is the margin that they are getting from our products lesser or more than the margin that they get from the other products?
So, in fact, our margins are slightly more
They're more.
compared to A and B.
Okay. So then I don't think there should be any reason to suspect that the distributors are not pushing our products because they gain a larger profit from pushing our products, right?
Right. I think that's a fair
Yes.
assessment.
So I think the problem is because there's not enough demand from a customer side for our products.
Right.
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 So do we have any data on what is happening on the retail side of it? Like which okay, we already know that actually A and B sales are going up. To go on the business side of it, I'd like to see why this would be happening, right? Do we have any feedback on the kind of reviews that our customers are giving regarding our products? Why is it that they're not preferring our products?
So, if we look at some of the reviews that we are receiving online, a lot of the customers seem to be very happy with the product,
Okay.
and there seem to be no complaints.
Okay, let's go to the price, average price per unit. You said that has increased a little bit. So, is that probably a reason that the customers are not buying our products?
Actually, so our average price per unit was increasing because we manufactured about 90% toasters
Yes.
and our total sales come from there. So 90% of our units are toasters,
Yes.
and the remaining 10% are refrigerators and
Okay.
microwave ovens, which tend to be priced higher.
Oh, okay.
When doing an estimation exercise, at some point you'll have to make assumptions on numbers. But always try and give reasonable justifications as to why you're choosing a particular number. Here, the candidate made one such assumption regarding the percentage of the poor population which would be able to afford the solar lantern. However, he did not give any justification for the same. But when prodded by the interviewer, he was able to come up with a reasonable one. Ideally, the candidate should have given it without the need for the interviewer's prodding.
So toasters prices have not increased. Is
We've
that
not
correct?
increased our toaster price, yes.
Right. Mm, so there's no reason to suspect that the increase in price would have led to a decrease in demand with our customers, right?
Yes, from our perspective, we've not changed our price,
Okay.
yes.
Now, looking at the only thing that is sort of standing out for me is that during those 3 months we were not able to sell anything. That could possibly be a reason that the customers have sort of there's been a decrease in demand from a customer side.
Right.
Do you think that's a fair assumption?
Yes, I mean, since we couldn't put any products on the
Yes.
retail store during those 3 months, we've definitely taken a hit. I think the question we want to answer is whether the 3 month shutdown is responsible in entirety for the kind of 20% decline we've seen over the last 2 years.
Okay. So it's very interesting. And how can we sort of verify that that has happened?
You can take 2 minutes to structure your thoughts,
Okay.
and we could discuss after that.
Okay. Okay, so let me just analyze 4 aspects of the business situation. So we have the competition, we have the product, we have the market in itself, and then we have the customer, right? Now, since our sales are declining, is it that our competition is doing something that we are not able to do in terms of sales? That they're encouraging their sales through maybe some schemes or whatever that customers are looking into their products?
In terms of schemes, I think the only scheme that is provided is the after sales service
Yes.
to the customer.
Yes.
And on that front, we provide a 2 year guarantee to the customer, while most of our competitors provide a 1 year guarantee.
Okay, so this is definitely better, right?
Right.
So this should not be a problem. When we come to the product side of it, you already said that we're getting very good reviews in terms of products. What about the price of our product? Is it generally priced higher than the competition, or?
In fact, our prices have remained the same, but two of our competitors, A and B,
Yes.
over the last 2 years, they've made a reduction of almost 50% in their price.
Okay, so this seems like a
So you can say our price is 1.5x and their price is 1x.
okay. This could possibly be the catalyst because of which our sales have dropped. Because during those 3 months, customers would have had to opt for the other products, and
Right.
maybe during that they figured out that probably our price is not. They might feel that our price is not really justified or whatever. So this
That's
could
very
be,
likely, yes.
This could be a reason. I'm going to come back to this later. What's happening to the market, if I might ask? Has the toaster market remained the same, or has it decreased? Has it increased? What's happening?
You mean the overall market
Yes, the
size?
overall market
The
size.
overall market size has been gradually increasing.
Has been increasing, right?
Yes.
So this should not be a problem for us. What is happening to our customers? Like, has the customer base been changing? Have been changing according to them? Has their affordability been changing?
Not really.
Not really.
The larger Indian market has remained the
Okay.
same.
So I think our problem narrows down to the fact that our competitors have reduced the price, and it seems to resonate very much with this thing that AMD's sales have increased while CMD's sales have decreased because they've reduced the price, right?
Right.
So I think we can narrow it down to this being the major factor that our sales have been declining.
Right.
Would you like me to go ahead and see what we can do to?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. So if we decrease our price to 1x, what's our cost of production right now? If I might ask.
Sure. So, in terms of our cost of production, we take a 20% margin
Yes.
on our selling price, and the remaining becomes our cost price. So, if
Okay,
1.5x is our sales price,
Yes.
we have roughly 0.3x, which is our profit margin, and
Okay.
1.2x becomes our cost price.
Okay, so this is like 1.2x and this would be 1.5x. Am I correct?
Yes.
Per unit, right?
Right.
So we cannot possibly reduce our price to 1x to match AMD, otherwise we'll be going in negative profits. Let's analyze the cost side of it a little more. So we have variable cost and fixed cost, right? What's our fixed cost like?
So for this analysis, we can set aside our fixed cost. In fact, what I had given you was the variable cost per unit.
Oh.
A fixed cost is a investment that we've already
Okay,
made.
okay. So, if you don't mind me asking, what is our competitors' variable cost like?
So our competitors' variable cost, again, they have a 20% margin on their selling price. So their selling price is 1x. 0.2x is their profit margin. So their 0.8x would be their cost price.
Okay, so competition is at. Where is this difference coming from? If you know that, if you have any data on that, like, can we reduce our cost price to match their cost price?
I guess that's one of the analysis we'd like you to help us with, and let us know what information we could help you
So
with.
let's go back to the value chain. In manufacturing, the variable cost that we'd have would be the raw materials that we are getting in, like
Yes,
getting in the factory.
that's one of our costs in manufacturing. Yes.
So is that on a competitive level with our competition?
On a per unit basis, yes, we are at par with
Yeah.
competition.
What about the labor cost?
In terms of labor costs per unit, our costs are on the higher side. The candidate is breaking down the variable costs across the value chain, which is a good approach. This has enabled her to identify labor costs as being the reason for the client's higher cost per unit. Over here, her communication could have been more crisp and concise. She could have said, I would like to break the variable cost across the value chain and then benchmark each of the costs against competition. This has the advantage of setting the tone for the interviewer regarding the next piece of analysis you're going to do, as well as gives him an opportunity for course correction if required.
Okay, our labor costs are higher. Why is that? Do you have any idea?
So one of the reasons that we think might be responsible for this is our client recently moved their facility to China, and as a result of that, they've got an advantage in terms of the wages that they pay to their employees.
Okay. They have moved to China, so their labor costs are less up. Now, if we want to decrease this, our only option would probably be to relocate our factory, which would in itself be a very expensive affair. Because in India, is there a possibility that we could decrease the labor cost without there being any backlash from the people working there?
I guess if we had to relocate, we could, but it'll be difficult to relocate outside of India because our client values their identity of being an Indian brand with Indian workers, and hence they wouldn't be interested in moving it outside.
That doesn't seem to be a good idea anyway, because I think the transportation cost and the distribution cost would also increase to get your products from outside India to India, right?
Right, but I guess our competitors are able to do that, so in a cost-effective way. So
Okay, so let's not look at relocating outside.
Right.
What about reducing the labor cost in any other way? Like, actually, can we reduce the labor cost in India without any backlash.
Would you have
from
any
them.
suggestions on that front?
Uh, what is the labor cost in India like? Like, are we at competitive level with the labor cost in India, or are we paying them higher than what
So,
generally
in terms of
is?
the data that we have,
Yes.
what we've seen is where our factories located, the labor costs tend to be higher,
Yes.
but in other parts of India, they often tend to be lower.
Okay. Uh, this does not seem to help us very much because we'll have to have the factory, and then we cannot reduce the labor cost without them jumping to other factories, right? Because they wouldn't work for us if they're getting a lesser wage.
Right.
Or is the demand for labor much lesser than the supply? Is that the case?
So I guess in certain areas where the labor cost is higher, we could potentially consider relocating our factory out there.
Okay, so
Yes.
that is an option, right?
Right. While trying to find solutions to reduce labor costs, the candidate moves away from the MECE structure and has made several assumptions about what is viable. For example, she made the assumption that it is not feasible to move the location of the factory since it would be very costly to do so. She also then makes an assumption that moving to China does not make sense since transporting the goods to India would be expensive. While these assumptions are intuitive, it's best to test them with data instead of directly coming to a conclusion. A better approach would be to say, we can now look as to how we should reduce labor costs. We can either reduce the number of laborers or we can reduce the wages per hour. To reduce the wages per hour, we can either negotiate lower wages at our existing location or we can consider moving to a new location where the local wages are lower. Also, please excuse a slip of tongue. In the interview, I say in certain areas where labor costs are higher, we can consider moving the plant. I intended to mean in certain areas where labor costs are lower, that the plant can be moved.
Uh,
So, Snigdha, this looks good. I think we've covered a good enough ground. Why don't we synthesize our findings so far and then we'll take it up with our management further?
Okay, so basically, our conclusion is that our sales is declining because our competitors have sort of reduced their price. And that is because their cost of production seems to be quite lesser than us, hence they are able to get the same margin at a lesser selling price. Right? We should look into decreasing our cost somehow. If that is not the case, one good way to go about it would probably be sort of shifting the segment of our toasters to a higher segment of, like, we could rebrand it as better toasters and then look at a new customer base. That is also a possibility, but I think to get back our customer niche, getting our cost down would be the better thing to do. Now, since we only came up to the labor cost, we could look into reducing our labor cost somehow, probably by relocating our factory to somewhere that has a lesser general benchmarking of labor costs.
All right.
That's what we have.
Thank you so much. Thanks. In conclusion, let's look at the learnings from this case. In terms of positives, the candidate asked good preliminary questions regarding the goal of the market entry, which part of the value chain is the client looking to enter, etc. He also explained his overall approach to solve the market entry by dividing it into two parts to estimate profits and then to decide what should be the operating model. Let's now look at the areas of improvement for the candidate. The estimation involved in the market sizing could have had a much better approach if the candidate would have thought out his entire structure before proceeding ahead and then doing the calculations. The candidate also made several calculation mistakes which have to be avoided during a case interview. The candidate also lost considerable amount of time while doing the estimation, which meant he could not complete the case. If the candidate had a better structure to solve the estimation problem, which was aligned with the interviewer beforehand, then he could have quickly gone through the calculations and arrived at a final answer.